if you remember, but I can remember in school, the guys that were a little bit more sensitive, they were the ones that generally got picked on. And so when you'd see that and you'd see that model, that behavior happening, you weren't necessarily willing to step out. And I think that's really been a detriment to us.
Hello and welcome to Share.care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, Alain. How are you today?
Doing really well, Damian. Thanks for having me on the show. How are things?
Yeah, it's great at this end, and you're in Canada, I'm in Australia, and it's lovely how, we had to go through COVID to get to this, but we can actually meet people around the world and have a discussion. How unusual is that?
No kidding, right? How that really took off during those last 3 years of the being able to meet with people. And yeah, like what time is it over there? It's 6:30 p.m. here in Canada. What time is it over there? You're
9:30 a.m. on the next day. We're in the future, so you're going to catch up to us.
Got to catch up.
Exactly. And from that perspective, it's really good that we're actually able to have these conversations because, I love my pop culture references, as the audience know, and I'm going to reference Crocodile Dundee here, where in the movie Crocodile Dundee, they're talking about a psychiatrist, and from, she says, you probably don't have a psychiatrist in Walkabout Creek to get your problems out in the open. He says, no, well, if we have a problem, we tell Wally tells everybody else, and no more problem. And I just think about that from that as an analogy of how we deal with things. A lot of times people tend to bottle things up and think that they're the only person experiencing that problem. Is that your take on it as well? And really, there's something about just being able to open up and chat with someone and realize that you're not alone. Other people are experiencing the same kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think that's the essence of what it is for us being men, isn't it? Speaking with men and doing this men's work that I'm doing now, I just found that, and in my own life, especially when things were challenging, how really difficult it was to be able to open up and share. And I think that's because we were never really taught to do that as children, right? And in my era, it was children to be seen and not heard. Our as boys, we're always our energy was being suppressed. And so we never really learned the skills of how to have a conversation or how to be vulnerable. And when you did, and I don't know if you remember, but I can remember in school, the guys that were a little bit more sensitive, they were the ones that generally got picked on. And so when you'd see that and you'd see that model, that behavior happening, you weren't necessarily willing to step out. And I think that's really been a detriment to us. And so today, in the work that both of us are doing, I think it's really important that we model and we show men that it's all right to be complete and whole in who we are and show all aspects of ourselves, because I think that's truly how we grow as individuals.
Do you want to add to that? Because looking at your background and when you're talking about opening up and those challenges, because from what you've been through, you've had some pretty traumatic experiences, and then you've actually gone through that, and now you're helping other men with your program, the Awakened Man. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you actually learned to open up.
Yeah, that's a great question for sure. My journey really started back in the early 20s when I wanted to really be a chef in my career. Early in my career, I wanted to do that, and I was fortunate enough to find mentors that helped me get into the culinary Olympics, believe it or not. And so I say that because today everyone's familiar with Food TV and Bobby Flay and Iron Chef. That wasn't happening back when I was doing this stuff. But there was so much focus on that aspect of my life that I totally missed the marriage and the family that I was building on as well in my life. And ultimately ended up by costing me. And while I won medals and that at Olympics, it ultimately cost me my marriage, and not just my marriage, but bankruptcy and divorce. And I actually ended up by going through about a 2-year point of depression where I hardly ever saw my kids. It was a real tough time. And so I started this journey of self-development and self-improvement. And I can remember a friend of mine gave me this set of tapes by Jack Canfield called Self-Esteem and Peak Performance. Back in the Nightingale Conant days where you'd buy the box set and there'd be 6 cassettes in it, right? Those of you that
we're showing our age here because I remember that.
Yeah, and popping it in there. And I literally wore that series out. It was the thing that got me through, right? Got me through life. But what I found was that 25 years later in a new marriage, that I hadn't put into practice anything that I had learned. Instead, while I went and took courses and got trained in NLP and lots of other types of mind work, nothing really stuck because I wasn't really embodying that as an individual. Instead, it was an intellectual piece. And I almost lost my second marriage almost 25 years after that. And what saved me was that I had my wife, and we're still married today, gave me the opportunity to do the work. And she gave me that chance to go out and do it. And I knew that this was the opportunity for me to make a change. And if I didn't make that change, then I was going to be not marriage number 2, but potentially moving down that number 3 and number 4. And why do we want to live like that? So how can we be so successful in some aspects of our life and yet in others not really show up? And that really was what drove me to doing men's work, is to I'm experiencing these things. There's nowhere for me to go to learn and share what I want to share. My friends didn't know how to help. And I find that building environments where men can feel that they can share and open up, where it's free of shame, blame, that they have an opportunity now to understand and see what's being modeled in front of them, how it is, what it is to be an awakened man, to truly be manly.
Tell me a little bit about this, doing a lot of this studying NLP and all that kind of stuff, because I relate to that, having done that. And I used to read a lot of books as well, but that changed to having all this knowledge, but actually then implementing it, because we know, and you'll know with your NLP background, it's knowledge is one thing, but knowledge is a conscious function. Action is an unconscious function. What was it that made that shift for you? And when I look at my background, there was one. It was actually wasn't. I thought it was a book, but it was actually just a tape because I had the audio. It was Wayne Dyer's "How to Be a No Limit Person," and I listened to that over and over, like you. Wore out the tape and had to get another one and wore out. But I listened to it over and over and again. And it wasn't until I started actually implementing that it made a difference. How did you make that transition to implement?
Great question. The biggest change for me was moving that, a reverend friend of mine told me the longest journey that we'll ever make in our life is from our head to our heart. And he's so true. And it really started to focus on the spiritual aspect of my life and that understanding of who it is and what do I want to become as a man. And when the moment that I made that change and started to take responsibility for exactly where I was, because I couldn't blame anybody anymore. I couldn't blame my wife. I couldn't blame my parents or anybody else. Anything external is just the way it is. Today, I'm here because of the decisions and the ideas and the actions that I've taken. So the moment that I started doing that, then the work started to change and shift. I started to take that responsibility and that care for exactly how do I want to show up. And so ultimately, I just led by virtually every day asking myself the question, I'm the kind of man who, and then whatever I put at the end of that sentence is the intention I set for myself. It's one of the things I teach the men in our work is when you're really struggling and you're lost, what is the kind of man you want to become? And so I'm the kind of man who, when you finish that sentence, it gives you an opportunity to really hone in and focus on the type of individuals you want to be. And the moment that I became present and worked more from my from my heart instead of my head, things started to shift and started to change. Now it's still obviously a work in progress, but it's been leaps and bounds. Like the time crunch has been phenomenal compared to what it was before.
I love what you talked about then is you mentioned the question you said is, who do I want to become? The question that I have with that is, I mean, you hear a lot of people talk about they had to hit rock bottom. They had to go as low as they needed to go. And my question is, and one of my business partners, Jenny, she talks about, and she says, you learn through pain until you learn through joy. Which I found very profound, and it was only until I'd heard that it really hit me. Do we need to go through that pain to actually wake up and go, "Hey, I can do this differently"? Or what is it? You know, when you look at your experience and also to taking into account your linguistic experience and all the study that you've done, what is it that causes us to hold on to this? Really, I mean, it's kind of like we're desperately holding on to this almost pain until it gets too much pain, and then we let go and go, oh, actually I need to do this differently. What is it, do you think, that we hold on to that for?
Really, I think we hold on to that, and at least it's true for me, is that we hang on to that pain because it actually becomes part of who we are. It's how we identify ourselves. And when we get caught in the story that we've wrapped ourselves around that pain, and we keep telling ourselves that story, we're like that hamster on the treadmill, right? We just can't seem to get off. And what it causes us to do, it's when we're conscious enough, is to ask a better question. And the better question for me is what can I learn from this experience? What has this experience taught me about who I am? And so if you dive into a little bit of a root cause analysis, to use more of a business term, but to dive in and asking those different why style questions. So why is it that I ultimately ended up by being in a position that I was divorced? Well, I was spending so much time focused on one aspect back to my life, my career, and neglecting my family life. Okay, so why was I doing that? Well, I was doing that because for me, for me to feel worthy was to do something successful in work. And as I continued to backpedal on that and figure out those pieces and dive into it, I ultimately came down to understand that, and I think this is true for a lot of us, is that we don't feel valued or worthy enough. And I think as men, one of the things that we truly need is to be validated. And unfortunately, we look for that validation externally. And while that's great, and that helps us, the validation must start and come from within. So the journey is truly a downward and an upward journey in terms of understanding of how we show up. But that was really the catalyst and the change about how it is and why we stay in these mindsets, is that we get caught in the story, and we need that opportunity to be able to step back just a bit to ask a different style of question.
I'm glad you went there, because I wanted to ask that question about, you mentioned about this focus on career, and as a result, your marriage fell apart. But I know so many people that have amazing careers, they have amazing businesses, do fabulously, and have amazing families too. And so it's not that this focus on career is something that causes the detriment to your family. What do you think that difference was that made, from your perspective, that caused that neglect of the family, as you put it, to use your words, if I heard that correctly?
Yeah, and it truly was about the self-identity of who I saw myself as this successful chef and doing that work. And I didn't see the same idea of what it meant to be successful as a husband or as a father, because that was not the model that I grew up in. And not that my dad was extremely successful in his career. He worked hard all the time, and I knew he needed to do that, raising 5 of us. And having to be out of the house all the time. But in looking at it, I didn't have the same meaning behind, and the story behind the importance of what family is about fatherhood, and adding that into my life. And so I think it's really key that, the other distinction I would make is, as I think about the story, is that experience also then led me for 2 decades to be very nervous about leaning into my desires to do something, right? To be more successful in career, to start men's work. And I needed to recognize that just because I may have made a mistake in my early 20s and into my my 30s, I could write a different chapter if I truly chose to do that. And I think it's to your point. There's lots of men who are successful in business and at home, and so you can have them both. The idea is, are you conscious enough daily? Have you made the concerted effort to show up the same way you show up in your career as you do at home, in your at home as you do with your children? And I think when we start to embody the full aspect of who we are as men, then life truly moves in light years ahead for us.
So from that perspective, when you're talking about how you showed up differently, what was the difference between take one and take two? If I were using that analogy, you had that first where you focused really much on your career but to neglecting the family, to then, from what I can see in my research and your background, you're pretty successful now too. You're doing exceptional work in a variety of different areas, but as you said, your family is not being neglected. How is those behaviors different between then and now?
Yeah, today the focus for me is how I want of what are my intentions today, and how am I taking care of my family. And for example, working with the awakened man, this is still a part-time business for me, as well as it's still doing full-time work, and I have a family to take care of. So
Yeah.
before, I would have more than easily, more than happily, have sat behind the computer screen, worked until 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening on between business and the awakened man. But instead today, this variation, the difference is that I have an open conversation with my wife and say, you know what, hon, I have about 2 hours of work, and it's at 8:30. I'll be out of the office. And in the past, I may have said that, but I would have taken it for granted that it's okay. She'll understand. And I don't do that anymore. Today, I make promise, because integrity is important for me as I'm showing up. And so now, if I say I'm out of here at 8:30, I'm out of here at 8:30, and then I spend that time with my wife and spend that time with my kids.
So it becomes more about not so much that you've changed what you're doing work-wise, it's about having that conversation. Is that the difference?
That's a part of the difference. And the other part of the difference is being aware and not taking my family and the other aspects of my life for granted. Because when we don't put that energy in, and I think that's the distinction I'd like to really bring home here, is where our energy goes is where our consciousness resides. And if we're not conscious about all the parts of who we are, if I was a single guy without a spouse, without kids, hey, have at it. You have time is all your own. But when we have commitments outside of just a career, we need to be conscious about those commitments that we're making to ourselves. When you wake up every morning and you roll over and you see your spouse, what commitment are you giving her? What commitment are you saying to her if you're not willing to include her in your journey and along with the journey? And at the moment that we start to do that, and that was really the shift in perspective. And so things just work better. They work together. And that doesn't mean that it's always a rosy day in our household, but the challenge is that we can at least now have a conversation and we know exactly where each other's coming from.
So again, it's having that conscious awareness of there's other aspects in your life that are important to you. So it's not just one aspect that you're solely focused on. And we can do that as men. Stereotypically, we are very singular focused and we're in the moment. We do that very well. And that is generally why, or I've read research as to why men tend to rise to a lot of careers, even careers as, the women are generally known for, like hairdressing, those fashion. There's a lot of men that rise to that because of the singular focus is my understanding. But what you're saying is you need to actually make that conscious effort that while you're focused on this, you have to be aware of these other aspects in your life and make that a purpose as well. Am I understanding that correctly?
100%. I think back to the Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of highly successful people, right? And he talks about in that book about the different aspects of our lives, right? I call them the wheel of life, or actually turned it into an integrity challenge. And what the integrity challenge is all about is it forces us to look at different components of our life. So for example, it's our financial aspect. How are we showing up with that? Emotional. How are we willing to be vulnerable enough with our spouse, with our friends? Physical, are we taking care of ourselves? Spiritual, professionally, and relationships. So it's a totality view of who we are as men. And the moment that we can have we put energy towards each of those, it doesn't mean that we're going to have time allotted every day for it. Much like how Covey talked about, and I've really taken this on from years ago when reading that book, is looking at how can I fit this into my 7-day plan? How do I carve that time off? And so one of the things that my wife and I now do is we both plan every other Friday a date night. One Friday is my time, the next time it's her time. And so we consciously make plans on how we're going to support our relationship, doing things that are outside of the everyday run-of-the-mill work that all couples go through. And so I think it's about making sure you're putting that time, that energy into the different aspects of our life that really makes that shift and that change.
I love that you mentioned that about planning that date night, because when you look at it, most people put a lot of time into planning a holiday, for example. And then when you're talking about your relationship, it's not something that they will put that time into planning. Oh, we need to have this special time together. And then you hear people say, oh, as time goes on, your relationship, peters out a bit. But is that petering out more so because you're not actually planning to make it exciting?
I think so. I think it's because we also start to take each other a little bit for granted. Things are challenging, and they don't have to be anything too spectacular. Like on our most recent date nights, we've gone dancing. We've gone and seen Shakespeare in the Ruins with a live play. So there can be lots of things. My wife loves to golf, so we've gone golfing. It can be anything. The key is spending a little bit of time thinking about it. And what I really enjoy about the process, or what we both enjoy, is that we don't let on to the other one exactly what it is that we've planned. We just show up and it happens, and then we happen to participate. So let me tell you, when my wife says she wants to go dancing or go Shakespeare in the Ruins, it gets a little uncomfortable. Don't know if I can. Not sure I'm that great of a dancer, but it was all right.
I love that. I had a mentor once tell me as well, from a woman perspective, it actually is not that difficult. I mean, if she's interested in you, it's not that hard to make a woman massively, insanely in love with you. It's those little things that make the difference. And an example too was not, as you said, you've got a date night planned and you might not have all the details, so that keeps a little bit of excitement, but she knows it's coming. And is that, from that perspective, part of what makes that work? And because as it was described to me, it's one, never surprise a woman because she won't be ready, and you've done the, she'll be like, I haven't got my hair done and all that kind of stuff, and you'll be in trouble. But what you do is, because of the way generally, and we're speaking globally here for the people that might be on the fence, they're going, hey, that's not, it's the same for everybody. No, it's not the same for everybody, but just more generally. But if you mention, if you say to your partner, you say, honey, I've got a date night plan for you next week. We're going to go out. We're going to have a great time. And I've got a babysitter booked. It's all taken care of. So just be prepared. We're going to go out somewhere. As soon as you've said that, you're already getting points, and you haven't done anything yet. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely. That and the trepidation, especially in the beginning when you're trying this, right? Because for both partners, if you're not used to doing that, and we weren't at all, right, that we would spend this time, but it was so exciting to see that she actually understands who I am, because not only are we doing things that she wants to do, but we're doing things that both of us would enjoy, and vice versa. And so I think you really get an opportunity to, men, we struggle with trying to find how to be intimate with our partners outside of the bedroom. And what a better way to do that by planning a date night that has nothing to do with the sex side of our lives, but has totally to do with really getting to know each one another. And so, like when we went to the Shakespearean Ruins, I just thought that was so incredible because it was something that was outside of both of our, that we would never have talked about going to a play, and to get an opportunity to experience that and meet different people really elevated, how close we became. We were, because of an experience like that, not just your typical, well, we're going to go out for dinner and it's Chinese food tonight. And those are the easy ones. So those can happen on other nights. But when you really take a moment to listen and understand who your partner is, man, the ideas you can come up with are just phenomenal.
And with that, I mean, I love that you mentioned that too, and you touched on the sex component as well, and there is that saying that women need love to have sex, and men need sex to feel love. So you're kind of at crosshairs to start with, but I remember Jim Gray talking about when apparently his wife liked opera and he hated opera. And he talks about the experience of, she wanted to go to the opera, taken to the opera. He finally caved in, and he's got dressed, and they've gone out. And he's wearing the penguin suit, and gets to the opera, and he goes through this what he calls a mind-numbing experience. They get home, and he said as soon as the garage door closed, she jumped on him, made love to him right there in the car. So the next morning he's on the phone. How much are season tickets to the opera? How important is it for a guy to understand that a woman likes sex just as much as a guy does, but she's stimulated differently. She needs that romance. She needs all that interaction, and that's what that intellectual side of things, those little appreciation. You might be at the office, and rather than just turn up home, you say, "Honey, I'm leaving the office. I'll be home soon." Just a little text like that makes all the difference. How important is it for guys to understand that? And to me, it seems pretty simple, but how do we get that across to guys?
That is so true, Damien. That we've really missed the boat on it. And I truly believe it's because as men we were raised to be doers, right? The idea of a man is that we're providers and presiding over our families. But there's another aspect to that. There's still a nurturing part, and we tend to leave that side for the wives. But when we choose to start to nurture our relationships, and in February this past February, we in our men's circle we did a book called "The Masculine in Relationship," by G.S. Youngblood, and he talked about how we as men can come in and lead our spouses and lead them towards things that are important for us as a couple. And one of the things, how we describe that, we'll go back to something as simple as going out for dinner. How often have you had the conversation as well? Would you like to go out for dinner tonight? Yes. Well, where do you want to go? Well, I don't care. You choose. Those times when we do that as men is an opportunity for us to really lean into and nurture that relationship. We know what the kind of food that our partners like. And so, you know what, dear, I've got reservations for for both of our places. Let me know which one you'd like to go to. We're going to go to this great Italian restaurant that you like. We can go to this great sushi restaurant. But you take action, you take step, you lean into it. And when we start to do those little things, that's when that intimacy level starts to grow up, it starts to rise. And I think that's really what Jim was talking about in that story. It was about he was willing to lean into and participate. And I think when we do that, then we end up by becoming much more attractive to our partners because they have enough decisions to make every day. And for us to not participate really leaves a lot on the table.
Do you think part of that is that component? Because I know from when I'm doing things, it's if we're going out for dinner or something like that, I'll say, we're going out here and I've planned this. And sometimes it'll be a place that I know she likes. Other times it'll be a place I like. But what I've noticed, it's not about what the place is. And sometimes it'll be even food that she doesn't like. But it's more the fact that we're there doing something together. And that's the component that they really lean. I think, is it because we're so task orientated and focused on getting it, we like to do this and we want to do the things that are important to us. We forget that that's not necessarily how our partner is thinking. They're just thinking, I might not like this. How many times has a woman wore uncomfortable clothing, but they want to do it because it impresses you? And we forget that it's really about that. And we just, as you said, need to lean into it and say, hey, we're doing this. And realizing that it's not about what we're doing. It's about the connection that we have while we're doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, just to build on that as well, I would also suggest that the more that we can take the decisions and that off of her shoulders, ultimately our spouses, they fell in love with us because of what were we doing in the beginning of the relationship. We were doing the things we're talking about right now, right? Everything was firing and we're trying all these things and, hey, I've booked this and we're going to do that. And we didn't really know each other, but we were willing to try and do things. And as life happens and as we get comfortable in our lives and our day-to-day monotony, we tend to forget about those simple things that can help out and grow that relationship. And to me, intimacy starts at the from the moment that we get up in the morning and how it is that we address each other, how it is that we're, are you grateful to see your spouse? Are you happy about the direction that the relationship's going? Having those conversations. And that was another topic we dealt with, is helping men really have those crucial conversations and those tough ones where maybe things aren't going well in the relationship. Because let's face it, there's seasons in all relationships, and sometimes that season can get pretty cold. But if we're willing to stand in it and lean in towards and discovering and uncovering what it is going on in the relationship, we're going to be rewarded so much because they understand that we actually care. We care enough to dive into and explore what it is that's happening. And for years, my wife and I had a weekly ritual where we would ask, so on a scale of 1 to 10, where's our relationship? And if anything was under a 7, then we had to talk about what do we need to do to get it back to at least a 7. And we caught that from Jack Canfield, but it really helped us, and it's been an ongoing joke for us all the time. Is that, well, you did something good, you can come back next week, but because we understand that we have to be in relationship means you have to participate, you have to be doing things, engaged in it, and sometimes those are doing the things that you don't really want to do, but what it does is it just shows that you care enough about each other that you're willing to do those things regardless of how you feel about it.
And how much of that too relates to being able to participate, but also, a simple discussion, which could be a hard discussion. We talked about just before about making that decision, saying, hey, I've got this planned, but sometimes you might have a bad day as well. You might have had, and I know I've had tough days where I've had to make a lot of decisions and get home. It's like, what would you like for dinner? It's like, I'm exhausted making decisions. I'm happy with leftovers. I really don't care what we have. I'm just letting you know that that's a tough decision. And that's and is it those conversations, the same sort of thing of knowing you can actually have that conversation too? It's just how you put it across.
Absolutely. And I love how you brought that forward, Damien. Exactly how you were talking about it is a way that we can model it for ourselves. We've had a tough day. The challenges, we've had lots of decision making. There was issues we had to deal with in our daily life. And then we get home and the conversation about dinner does occur. And it's being open enough to just say exactly what's going on for you instead of having her guess. That instead of saying, I don't know, I don't care, I'll eat whatever you want, but instead talking about your day and how it has impacted you, and how can I show up? And I think it's Brené Brown talks about in her relationship about, what percentage are they at showing up for the day? Hey, you know what? I'm only at like 30% here of energy I've got, and then her husband would say, well, I'm about at 30% too. Well, then they both have an understanding of where each other's at. Then they can move forward from that standpoint. But when we choose to not communicate, then we're left guessing where our partner's at. And I think how you were modeling it is perfect for how we can do that as men.
And adding to that as well, there's times too where sometimes pushing a situation, I think this is where we need to be probably a little bit little bit more sensitive or tap into that awareness, that listening, and not just listening with our ears, but listening with what's going on. Because sometimes when you say you have that tough conversation, or you might have that argument, so to speak, you have a disagreement, and you both just need a little space. And if you're pressing for a response, that can just make the whole thing worse. Sometimes it's better just to, if you're aware of it, go, hang on a minute, all right, you need some space. And it could be either or, but need some space, and say, okay, you recognize that. I know I've had that many times with a partner where she's upset, she needs some space, and go, okay, I'll give you some space. And then I'll come back a bit later and have that conversation. And every now and then I'll check in, and it's like I'm still getting the cold shoulder. It's like, oh, you might need a little bit more time. I'm here, but you probably need some time, and I'm going to go and mow the lawn, and I'll come back and maybe we'll talk later. Is that that sensitivity, being able to listen, not just with your ears, but assess the situation and work out, okay, what do I need to do here, and not be so pushy, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say maybe even taking a step back from that and having the very first conversation that you have as a couple is how are we going to handle when we're not at our best, and or we're in a moment of disagreement, and what are the ground rules around that, and so we can start to share. And again, I'm really big on modeling, so I would encourage the men to be the first to step in, to say, and that I'm willing to share what's going on with me. If you can just listen for a moment. This is a conversation, thinking back to the conversation that I had with my wife about when we started to do this, because she tends to be wanting to be a fixer as well, because she doesn't like to see me upset. And at first, I just need the steam to get off. Just if you can just give me enough space to let the steam come off, then we can go to that next step, and I'll ask you, what do you think about this? I need some direction or some guidance on it. And so we set some framework, and then part of the framework also is important, is about making sure that we're not getting into the gutter of name calling or doing anything that may have been past practices in other relationships, maybe things that we've seen as we've grown up, but to put a really good framework around what that conversation looks like. And if that includes timeouts and breaks from it, I think that's really key, especially for men, where we may not have regulated our emotional scale just yet. So we don't know how to do that. And so if we can get in tune with, hey, that's our emotions are getting raised, that we need that timeout, that we can express that and say, okay, I'm just going to take a break, or she needs to do it. Then we can step back and then re-engage. But I really think it's about a framework first before getting into the conversation.
And how much of it is being aware of the different styles of communication? Again, being stereotypical, but this is a mentor of mine described this to me, and he used the term, when women have a problem, they tend to want to talk about it, to talk it through, to work it out, and they do that through talking. Whereas men generally are the opposite. He has he says men have what's called a nothing box. It's just, we just need this space where and it's, I haven't seen the studies, but he described that they've actually tested. They hooked men up to these electrodes on their brains and things like that, and actually found that their brains can stop thinking, and we can actually go there. And that's how we deal with problems. When generally, if there's a problem, we just need to get there, and we just need to let it to chill, just to and let it do that fishing, and we don't even have to have a worm on it, because we just want nothing to happen. And then when that's it, then we can come back. How much of it is it being able to communicate that? And we, sometimes when we're having that conversation, we've all heard that men are Mr. Fix-It. So when she comes to us with a problem, we're trying to fix it rather than just shut up and listen. But the same token too, you just mentioned that there, that if I heard you correctly, you need that time. We just go, hey, I just need to let this off a little bit, and then I can talk about it. How much do we need to be aware of that and just express that? Say, hey, I just need to chill out for a bit, and then I can come and talk about it. But then you've actually got to go and do that talk as well. But
yeah, Exactly. You can't use that as a deflection technique.
Mm.
And unfortunately, sometimes we do that. I think it's really important, Damien, that we are in tune about with our emotions. And what I mean by that is just being aware, like the work that really, the hardest work that was for me was really understanding what was happening in my body when different emotions were happening.
Yeah.
And that I really started to learn and understand that through the NLP training and the hypnotherapy, and then really came and solidified as I started to look at the shadow work aspect of it, because you put yourself in that position of where you're uncomfortable. And when we start to recognize the the stages prior to when we're going to explode or blow up, I think that's when we have an opportunity to learn how to regulate. So what's going on with recognize, well, hey, what's going on? I feel that I've got a real shortness of breath happening right now. My sentences are short. I can only get 2 words out because I'm almost at the point of hyperventilating. Whatever that looks and feels like for you, then when you start to get that awareness, that's how you can start to take the different step forward in terms of how you want to approach these difficult conversations. And when you explain it somewhat like I've just done here with your partner, she will then pick up the clues, and she may say to you, yeah. And another thing I noticed too, Al, when you're getting really upset, is that your face gets really flushed. Hey, thanks for that, because I do feel really warm when emotions are high. So not only is she picking up on clues, you're picking up on clues, and then you can start to help each other understand emotionally what's going on for us, and then you'll have a better idea of how to engage and when it's important to disengage.
And when we talking about that, you mentioned about that tension, that stress, the anger that comes through. There's a fair bit of research coming out now that's showing that for men, that anger is really can be depression, it can be anxiety, and it's just how that's manifested. Where it's different for generally how it is manifested for women. But is that something that we need to be aware of? And how can, if you're aware of that, if you're, dealing with a lot of anger or experiencing a lot of anger, how can someone recognize that and go, hang on a minute, there's a deeper cause here that I might be worried about something. I might be worried about, am I going to lose my job? I might be worried about, what's going on with the family. My parents are dying or something like that. How do we become aware of that, and how can we address that?
Yeah, that takes some work for sure. And I think one of the key pieces about that, to recognize that when we are in a highly emotional state, is to be able to, and it doesn't have to. I think I should, be a little clearer with this. It doesn't have to happen in the moment. I don't want the audience to think that, oh, I got to be able to do this in the spur of the moment. There are still times to this day for me that I didn't clue into what was happening in that high emotional state until hours later, maybe even a day later. And that's okay. The key is that you're going back and cluing into what was going on about me, with me at that moment.
Yeah.
What was the story I was telling myself about what was happening?
Mm-hmm.
And once I understand the story that I was telling myself, then I can question, was that story true? What's the truth in that story? And where is there possibility that it was off track? And I think that's really important, is that recognizing that we can always come back and revisit the conversation if it didn't go well at a later date. As a matter of fact, it'll come to you better at a later date because the emotion will have subsided, and you'll be able to have a more critical view of really understanding about what was happening for you. And I found a lot of times, for the most part, for men, the reason we have anger is because we have a fear of identity being misguided. So we're not living in our identity, or somebody's challenging how we see ourselves, yet we're showing up in a different way for them. And so when that starts to occur, then we're challenged to really pay attention to what it is that we're doing that's out of alignment with who we feel that we are.
So with that component of that identity and being juxtaposed, you were talking about there, and that causing that anxiousness, how important is it to be aware of who you are and, I have questions about that from the side of things. I think, from my perspective, it's just you just choose who you are. You don't have to go on this quest. You just go, this is who I'm going to be. But having the conviction to stay true to that, and I'll relay that from an experience I had just recently. A few weeks ago, there was a very stressful couple of days that I had, and it was very exhausting emotionally and physically. And then I had a business function to go to, and I didn't want to go, but some friends said, come. And I said, well, here, this is the circumstance. I'm exhausted. I'm going to be flat. And I'm just letting you know, if you want to be there, just be aware of that. I'd prefer not to go, but if you want me to be, I'm going to be flat. And if that's okay from your perspective, then I'll come along. And the other part, which I didn't say, but I had in my mind, was if you don't like that and you want me to be there and you're going to get upset about that I'm flat, you can F off, basically. You're not the person I want in my life. And it's that attitude of going, this is who I am, this is who I'm showing up with, and I'm quite happy to let you know. And if that works for you, that's okay. If it doesn't work for you, then this is not the right environment. But how much do we need to have that conviction of going, this is what's right for me, and just express it? Say it nicely, but express it.
Absolutely. It's totally about it, because unfortunately, as men, we tend to be more people pleasers than we care to admit. We'll do more for somebody else than we will for ourselves. And until we start to take responsibility for how we are showing up. And when I say that, I don't mean that gives us the right to be a-holes and do whatever it is that we want and walk over people. What I mean is to stand, as you were talking about, in your conviction. What do you truly value in life? What's important to you? And then make sure that you're in alignment with that. And so that's why, coming back to saying, I'm the kind of man who, whatever you put after that is how going to show up. And then as long as you're doing that, you're in that alignment with it. You're absolutely right. To me, it's not a journey. The journey is every day, getting that little bit better, getting a little closer into alignment. Because I kind of see our lives more like an airplane, right? And, the adage of an airplane going from point A to point B, it's 90% of the time it's off course, because it's always course correcting. But ultimately it gets to its destination. And so that's how our lives are shaped. Lives are shaped in the same way, is that things are going to happen. Our lives are going to throw us a bit off course. But when we're in alignment and we know what who we truly are as men, what we stand for, what we're willing to die for in essence, then we can show up exactly how we need to in any situation. But we need to get clear on that first. And I think that's where we struggle as men, is that we're not necessarily clear about exactly who we are and what makes us who we are.
And taking that a step further, because there's part of the reason for this podcast is there's a lot of men out there today that are lost, lonely, and not feeling like they have purpose in life. And when we talk about how things have evolved, and obviously femininity has evolved as it should, and rightly so. But as a result of that, it seems to be that a lot of men have got lost as well. And I've had a number of women on this podcast that have specifically said, look, the whole point of the feminist movement was not about repressing men. It was about encouraging women, but it seems to have gone the other way. And I mean, and I know you're in Canada, you have a similar legal system as we do here. And I know from talking with the officers of the court and being involved there, they don't treat men and women equally. I mean, as they say men are, and this is directly from the court, men are stronger, more intimidating, more powerful. Now, and I relayed that from that perspective as well. When I was growing up, when I was a little kid, I had a sister who was 1 year younger, and girls mature a little bit more or quicker than men, and the boys. And there was a time there she was a little bit taller than me, which I really hated. But now she's a short ass, and I'm a lot taller, but that's okay. But I remember my mum specifically saying, when we were playing, she would say, "You're a boy, you're stronger, just be careful. If you play as you would normally play with a boy, you could hurt her. So be careful." And where do we need to come back to for men to recognize that, yes, we do have great power, and I'm quoting Spider-Man here, but that comes with great responsibility. And we need to embrace that. I mean, we talk about it, be manly, that you have a lot of power, but the purpose of that power is to be courageous, intelligent, compassionate, kind, and sensitive. So that is the purpose of your power. How do we get that across to men and say, hey, yes, you are strong. You have that power, but you need to be aware of the responsibility that comes with that power as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think there's so many different ways. I have a few different ideas on that right now, and I think of a clip from Jordan Peterson talking about how men should learn to be monsters, and then really live and lean into that, and then learn how to control it. And so the other side of that coin is similar. Is you think of the power of the samurai warrior, enough skill, enough intelligence to be able to decimate a human being, but also the reserve enough, the emotional intelligence enough to know how to do it and how to lean into things. And I think that's always the key. And then you go back to talking about we're really starting to touch on things like toxic masculinity, which I don't believe exists. I believe there's toxic behavior. I don't believe there's toxic masculinity. I think there's a difference.
I've yet to hear a definition which is solely one gender.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think, there's a difference between being aggressive and being assertive.
Yes.
Assertive means we're standing in our power. We're standing with the things we talked about earlier, with the virtues that we live by, that we choose to live by, who we are as men. Being assertive is taking it that one step further, like hurting that other person. And I think that's where we come back to things like, and I really like the work of Douglas Moore and Robert Gillette with King Warrior, Magician Lover, and that archetype idea of how that shows up. And I think there's different times in our lives. I would believe that there's different times in our lives where we need those different aspects of who we are, but it all resides under this king energy, which is that energy of being able to know that you have the force and the ability and the power to do great harm, but you also have the magician energy as well, that power that says, hey, we're going to hold that back a little bit and just be assertive enough to get our point across, assertive enough to be able to move the needle forward and keep everyone safe in that's in our environment. So I think there's different ways to do that. It takes practice, it takes skill, and I think those are the things that's what men's groups are all about. That's what our work is all about. In the two sides of the globe here is about teaching men the different ways to do that.
And how much of that is, when you talk about that open aggression, for example, how much of that is not having that emotional maturity, emotional control? Because I look at my experience, I was posted to the Australian SAS, which is the Special Forces, and all the guys there were they were Special Forces guys. They were really, really tough. And one of the toughest and probably the most lethal guy on the base, his hobby, what he did in his spare time was sewing. I mean, he took in my pants when I lost weight. And all of these guys, and we worked with the police TRG, tactical response groups as well. All of those guys, if you take them outside of the uniform off the base and just saw them everyday life, you wouldn't think much of them. You wouldn't go, I mean, there was a quiet confidence in how they walked, but they weren't projecting this, I've got to be tough. And is that where we need to get to for men as well? Going, hey, it's an inner confidence that, in a situation, if it flares up, you have that ability to address it, but also too in an appropriate way as well. One of my friends, he's a 7th Dan black belt in karate, and he works with a lot of students, youth, I should say, and adults from the police that are referred, they're both victims and perpetrators of violence. And he talks about, in a situation, he's got 5 Ds for resolving conflict, whether that's verbal or physical. And the first one is distance. And it's take a step back and assess the situation. Is this the conversations that we need to be having? It's not, being a man is not about projecting and puffing your chest out. It's about being intelligent and going, how are we addressing this? How do we need to do that so that we actually resolve this in a way that works for everybody, and we leave it just that little bit better than when we got here?
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. I think it's really important, and is that as we're showing up as men, is what is our outcome within each and every moment of our interactions that we're having. And if we can come from that perspective, and to your point, using the distance aspect, it's just taking a step back, thinking about what it is that is the outcome that you're desiring for this interaction that you're about to have, especially when the emotions get high. And I think when we do that, then we raise the level of how we're showing up, and it comes across. We are more. Not only do we feel more powerful, but the receiver sees that power because we are in control and we've been able to assess the situation, as opposed to flying off the handle. And part of that just because we haven't learned how to do that as men, as we talked about, as being kids and rambunctious and not really getting that, learning how to have any emotional control. But there's no reason for it any longer for us today. We can learn to do that, and we can do that by practicing and having the conversations that we were talking about, putting that structure and that framework so that we can learn how to be assertive without being too aggressive. Because in the beginning, it's going to be messy. Trust me, it's going to be messy. But if you have that conversation, and if you have those conversations, not just with your partners, but with your male friends and your coworkers, you start to have those are all opportunities for you to grow as a leader as well, because then they see a different side of who you are, and that you're working to become this person that you truly are, and you're showing it to them in the moment.
And from that side of things, do you think we've also lost that mentorship as well, and maybe partly because it's seen as you can have there's women's gyms out there, but if you were to have a male gym, it would be seen as sexist. Do you think we've lost because of that? And I understand that there's the reasons for why we have the women's gyms and that, and I'm personally I'm okay with that. And I look at it, when I was growing up, I would go out and play golf with my dad, and lawn bowls with my dad. And we go and he had a social club that he was part of. So we'd go to different golf courses all the time. And I think, and I facetiously say, it was because he wanted to get rid of me. He would pair me off with other people. So as a group of four, as you're playing golf, I would go and play with three other gentlemen. But the thing was, I spent 4.5 hours walking around a golf course with four other men. And I'm a young kid, and they were older, and I'm asking questions. So I was learning to ask questions, and I'm getting, and I don't recall any of them being, misogynistic or anything like that. I was just getting some good advice, but that good male time. Do you think we've lost that? And if so, do we need to bring it back?
Well, we have totally lost that. We've lost that connection of mentorship, right? And because we seem to, once we leave school and we're out of the sports arena, where there's truly a coach and has a vested interest in teaching you and helping you grow, and we start to get into the real world, so to speak, I think we lose that piece. And programs like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, that give an opportunity for older individuals to mentor other younger kids coming up, it's mostly coming out of broken homes, is a fantastic way for us to be able to practice the art of mentorship. And I think when you're doing that, you should really have three mentors in your life. There should be somebody that's a little bit further down the road than you are, so you have someone to learn from. And then you are also a mentor to somebody else, because you're a little bit further down the road than they are. And then that third mentor is that mentor that can bring it all together, and that's part of a group of men that you can share the experiences of what's happening within your mentorship aspect of your life. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, we start to participate, whether you do that through a Big Brothers or through a men's group, but truly putting yourself out there and being the mentor for somebody else, helping them. The rewards you get back are just so outstanding that I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to find that and practice it.
And with the work that you're doing, because that's what you're doing with your the awakened man. So you've got those programs. Can you tell us a little bit about those programs and how you actually facilitate that, enable guys to have that experience?
Absolutely. So we have two programs. Our first one is a group mentorship program. It's called the Band of Brothers. And what we do with this is it's cohorts of men. We get together on a monthly basis. We have a monthly theme, a topic that we go over. It's an opportunity for men to learn about a different aspect of their life. We follow the 5 pillars of man, I call them. And these 5 pillars start with purpose, identity, connection. We have a code of honor. So we practice one virtue a month, much like how Ben Franklin did with his characteristics of being a man. And the last one is on marriage. And so we meet together to do that. Mm. And then the other program that we practice is, if you want to go a little bit deeper, you want some one-on-one help, is we have what I call a hero's quest. And really what this is an intense first 90 days of, we're really going to unpack everything about who you think you are, who you thought you were, and really come down to the core, the essence of who you are as a man. And it extends to be a year-long program, and it's an opportunity to really change where you're at. And so if you're at that level where you really feel that there's time for a complete overhaul, that would be the program. If you're looking for more camaraderie and opportunity to learn and grow and be in the group of other men, then for sure Band of Brothers is the way to go.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the code of honor? Because I was looking at that, and I connect with that with share.care. We have what we call the code, which is a rewrite of the Knights Code, the medieval Knights Code, but we rewrote it from a gender neutral perspective, and we added a few bits and pieces that made it more relevant to today as well. An example was to laugh at yourself and not take offense at the opinions of others was one of the codes. It's, just have a bit of self-deprecation, but also to if someone says something, if someone calls you a name, for example, it's like if someone says you're a cow or a car or whatever, would you be offended? And recognizing too that it's your offense, not necessarily what the person said. Can you tell us a bit about the virtues you were talking about in your code?
Yeah, so we started off with 8, and then I moved it to 10, and then as I really started to evolve it and think about what it is to mean for us to be men, then we moved to 12. So we do a practice one a month, and really what it is a set of virtues. And so the virtues start with being all about brotherhood. It's really about mentorship and having the kinship of men who are like-minded. We're working towards living and being, better men. I always say that we're just ordinary, average guys looking to live extraordinary lives. So that's really the catalyst for that piece. And then we move into things like temperaments, and how to learn. And I'd like to tie that into topics that deal with addiction, or how we may have addictive behaviors in our life, and how can we embody temperance for us. So a nice stoic virtue as well, right? And then we get into the virtue of love as well. And again, that's all about how we can share and be vulnerable into our lives. Servant leadership. How are we showing up as that leader? It's easy to be a leader when you're in a position of authority, but how can we show up even in that position and really serve those that are around us? And so those are a few of them. We talk about spirit as well, that spiritual essence of who we are. And so I give them little exercises, little like tidbits, ideas. Maybe it's reaching out to an old friend. For example, the brotherhood virtue, I challenge them every year when we come across that. Okay, who is a friend that you haven't spoken to in a very long time? And make that reach out and go talk to them. Because for guys, we can end a relationship, no problem, with another guy, and never really talk to them about why it ended. And I think it's really important as men, we learn how to go back and really involve and have that brotherhood. And so that's how we employ them. It's a good way for guys to practice it. I like the idea of a month because it gives them a little opportunity to, hey, I didn't get a chance to do it this week. Okay, buddy, you got 30 days to do it. And then when we check in on our monthly basis, then we get an opportunity to see how we're doing.
And a month is a really good time period as well to integrate behavior as well, because it takes, is it 28 repetitions for it to just start to sink into the unconscious and start becoming how you actually operating. So how do people connect with you? What's ways we'll put this in the show notes, but can you just outline how best to contact you and where to best to find your information?
Yeah, the best way to do that is to go to the website, theawakenedman.net. Right at the top of that homepage, you're going to see a big red button there, and it's going to be a clarity call conversation, I suggest you give me a book, hit that button, book an opportunity to speak with me about where you're at in life. Let's see if there's things that we can work on together and help you grow and evolve as a man. And even in the end, if there isn't, my goal in each of those conversations is to leave you with something that helps move you from where you are today. And so I would start with going to theawakenedman.net.
I love that. We'll include that in the show notes as well. Before we finish, if you were to leave the audience with a key takeaway, something, in a nutshell to embrace, to be part of who they are, what would you want to leave them with?
I think so the piece I would leave it with is remember that in each and every moment of the day, we have an opportunity to keep ourselves in alignment with who we are. And we can do that by assessing our actions. And are our actions in alignment with what we're doing? And I think back to the essence of destiny quote. I don't know if you've heard it before, but basically it says, "Watch your thoughts, for they become words. Choose your words, for they become your actions. Understand your actions, because they become your habits. Study your habits, because they become your character. And develop your character, because it becomes your destiny." And I think when we can start back from the very thoughts that we're having and the stories that we're telling about ourselves, and start from that standpoint, and are we living in alignment with who we truly are, then we're doing ourselves a greater service.
That's awesome. I love that. Alain, it's been so wonderful having you on the show, sharing that wisdom. There's just so much knowledge there to unpack, and it's one I'm sure people will go back to and review again, because there is so much information that you can draw out of that wisdom that you've shared. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes for others and for you.